Under the broad daylight, a half-dead person was wandering on the street, a scene that Walter on his way to Jesse's house happened to notice. Seeing this familiar figure, a panicked Walter quickly turned his car around and chased after him, continuously calling out to the delirious Crazy 8. Crazy 8 vaguely heard someone calling his name, and when he turned around it was as if he saw a demon, which frightened him so much that he took off running, but the next moment was tragic.
You make me feel so good, you move my feet, I wanna sing and shout.
Walter got out of his car, looked around to see that no one was nearby, and then hurriedly dragged Crazy 8 into his car and took him away. Soon, Crazy 8 was brought back by Walter to the basement of Jesse's house. The two of them stood there dumbfounded, not knowing what to do next. They went upstairs to discuss a strategy. Walter asked Jesse about Crazy 8's character, fantasizing that Crazy 8 was someone who could be reasoned with, but remembering that just yesterday they were at gunpoint. Walter concluded that Crazy 8 didn't seem like a decent person at all. Jesse advised Walter not to be naive. Crazy 8 was a thoroughly vile and evil person, and if they let him go, he would surely seek revenge on them later. Just then, they heard Crazy 8's voice from the basement, which terrified Jesse. He regretted that they hadn't tied Crazy 8 up earlier, so the two of them grabbed baseball bats and went down to check, and seeing Crazy 8 still unconscious, Jesse hurried to the garage. Jesse unlocked the big lock he used for his motorcycle, even tried it on his own neck to make sure it was working fine, and then thoughtfully put it on Crazy 8. Only then did they feel somewhat at ease to discuss their plans. Walter suggested using hydrofluoric acid to dissolve Emilio's body, but they had to kill the still-living Crazy 8 before proceeding with that step. Clearly, the latter task was much more challenging. Although Jesse wanted no part in either task, Walter forced him to choose one. To be fair, Walter decided to use a coin toss to determine their roles. Reluctantly, Jesse chose heads, meaning he would handle Emilio's body if the coin landed that way. The coin landed heads up, and unashamed Walter wanted a best 2 out of 3, but Jesse firmly refused. Walter, drinking sullenly, pondered how to deal with Crazy 8. That's when Jesse called, saying he couldn't find a suitable container. Walter reminded him that any plastic tub would do. Jesse, looking at the flimsy plastic tub, felt it couldn't withstand the acid's corrosion. Walter got angry when he heard this, telling Jesse that strong acids wouldn't corrode plastic products. Didn't he know that? Jesse, tired of Walter's lectures, changed the subject to ask how his task was progressing. However, Walter hadn't made any progress. Jesse reminded Walter to get rid of Crazy 8 as soon as possible, and then he went through the shop picking out plastic buckets. Unfortunately, the biggest ones in the shop didn't fit the whole person. Meanwhile, Walter also began choosing the right tools to deal with Crazy 8. But Walter, having never killed anyone, found himself unable to go through with it using any method. At that moment, he noticed a plastic bag in his hand and thought perhaps suffocation was the least bloody way to do it. So Walter, with the plastic bag in hand, cautiously approached the basement, but to his utter surprise, Crazy 8 had regained consciousness. This frightened Walter so much that he dropped the plastic bag and ran. Crazy 8, who hadn't had water in 2 days, pleaded with Walter for a drink. Instead of killing Crazy 8, Walter turned into a temporary caretaker, tending to him with food and drink. Crazy 8 asked about Emilio's condition, but Walter remained silent. Crazy 8 realized Emilio must be dead. Back upstairs, the depressed Walter saw the contraband that Jesse had hidden on the table, though he never smoked. At this moment he wanted a hit to ease his mind. His joint rolling technique was absolutely top-notch, and his method of lighting it was simple and rough. The taste wasn't bad, though it was a bit harsh on the throat. Just as Walter was lost in the smoky haze, Jesse, who had gone out to shop, came back. Seeing Walter in such a stupor, Jesse couldn't help but lament that the once honest and straightforward chemistry teacher had now become like this. Walter asked him about his purchases, but Jesse said he hadn't bought anything because he couldn't find a large plastic tub anywhere in town that could fit a whole person. Walter scolded him, asking, "Can't you use your brain to buy 2 smaller plastic tubs and then cut the body into pieces to fit?" Apparently, Jesse hadn't thought of this cruel method, and he asked Walter if he's taken care of Crazy 8, and Walter remained silent. Just then, Jesse heard coughing from the basement. It seemed Walter hadn't dealt with Crazy 8 yet. Walter glanced at his watch and suddenly remembered his wife's scheduled prenatal checkup, so he quickly got up and left, promising Jesse that he would sort out his own issues tomorrow.
We flipped a coin! We flipped a coin!
At the hospital, the checkup showed that the baby was very healthy and also a girl. Exactly what Walter had been hoping for, but the thought of not being able to be there for his daughter as she grew up made it hard for Walter to feel happy. After the doctor left, Skyler confronted Walter, asking who Jesse was, as she had already found information about Jesse through phone records, and with Walter's strange behavior over the past 2 days, Skyler wouldn't rest until she got some answers. Walter had no choice but to lie and say that Jesse sold him contraband. Skyler berated Walter, saying he must be out of his mind. Walter admitted he had been a bit depressed these past few days, but his love for Skyler was unchanging, and he begged her to forgive him just this once. Meanwhile, Jesse was numbing himself with his stash, and in his excitement, he went to the RV to deal with Emilio's body, but just as Jesse was getting the body out of the RV, Skyler found Jesse after a maternity checkup. Seeing the body about to be discovered, Jesse tried to avoid the situation, but Skyler charged in and Jesse hurriedly tried to stop her. Jesse thought Skyler was there to sell something, but when Skyler introduced herself and said that Walter had confessed everything to her, Jesse broke out in a cold sweat. Skyler warned Jesse that her brother-in-law was a DEA agent, and if Jesse sold contraband to her husband again, she would make him regret it. Relieved, Jesse quickly promised not to mess with Walter anymore. Seeing Jesse obediently listen, Skyler finally left, but not without reminding him to turn over a new leaf. Jesse quickly agreed, and he breathed a sigh of relief because Skyler hadn't discovered the body. Jesse hurriedly closed the door to prevent anyone from coming back in. Frightened, Jesse hurried back inside and took a few hits of his contraband. With excitement, he dragged Emilio's body into the bathroom. Jesse muttered to himself as if performing a ritual for Emilio's soul. Then, with all his strength, Jesse placed Emilio in the bathtub and began pouring the acid in, finally completing his task. Afterwards, Jesse took a few hits of his contraband to calm his nerves. By this time, Walter had also finished his errands and came back. An angry Jesse confronted Walter about why he hid the fact that he had a DEA agent in the family. He told Walter about his wife's visit and also blamed Walter for lying about him selling contraband. But Walter argued that it was still better than telling the truth, and Jesse had no energy to argue back. Just then, Walter smelled Jesse using contraband. Before Walter could start criticizing, Jesse's defiance grew strong, saying, "It's my place, I call the shots," and he had already taken care of Emilio. Jesse even turned the tables on Walter for making him run all over town for stupid plastic tubs, saying his bathtub was perfectly sufficient and didn't require dismembering the body. Hearing this, Walter instantly collapsed. Calling him a stupid pig of a teammate, Walter hurried to the hallway to check the ceiling, which had already been corroded through by the acid. Walter grabbed Jesse and they quickly backed away. Then the ceiling, which had been eaten through by the acid, fell down directly.
Plastic container I asked you to buy. You see, hydrofluoric acid won't eat through plastic. It will, however, dissolve metal, rock, glass, ceramic. So there's that.
At that moment, Jesse finally understood the importance of knowledge. Walter never dreamed he could bring up such a foolish student, despite his repeated warnings that strong acids would corrode anything except plastic. Jesse still used the bathtub to dissolve the body. The harsh reality gave Jesse a good lesson. Now the two had work to do. They would spend hours cleaning up the bloodstains on the floor. During the cleanup, Walter reminisced about his early days starting a business. Back then, Walter was full of spirit, researching the elemental composition of the human body with his then-girlfriend Gretchen. However, even when they added up all the elements, they didn't reach 100%. Perhaps the missing part was the weight of the human soul. After cleaning up the mess, Jesse and Walter washed the blood off each other. Once they were clean, Jesse found his hidden contraband and eagerly took a few hits to relieve his depressed mood. Walter, meanwhile, went back to the basement to continue his role as Crazy 8's attentive caretaker. Just as Walter was about to leave, Crazy 8, tied to the pillar, stopped him, knowing that Emilio was dead and that if he didn't act, his fate would be the same as Emilio's. Crazy 8 intentionally said Walter's name and remarked that this line of work wasn't suitable for him. Walter was surprised that Crazy 8 knew so much about him. He thought they had pressured Jesse into talking about him, but Crazy 8 deliberately sowed discord, saying Jesse was a big mouth who hadn't kept Walter's secrets. Hearing this, Walter immediately went upstairs to confront Jesse. Seeing Jesse refusing to open the door, Walter kicked it in. He found Jesse indulging himself, which infuriated Walter, so he went straight to Jesse and started a physical altercation. He found the items Jesse had hidden in the toilet tank, intending to throw them away. While Jesse desperately tried to protect them, the result was that the two of them started fighting.
It's worth nothing when you smoke it all!
Jesse took advantage of Walter's distraction and ran downstairs, with Walter immediately chasing after him. But Walter, older and sick, couldn't keep up with the younger Jesse. Just as Jesse was about to drive away, Walter hurriedly caught up.
Where the hell do you think you're going?
Hey, back off, man! Jesus!
We've got work to do!
No, you got work to do. I did my part.
You mean that obscenity that I spent the last 2 hours cleaning up? That is your contribution?
Yo, kiss my pink ass, man! I didn't ask for any of this! Alright, how am I supposed to live here now, huh? My whole house smells like toe cheese and dry cleaning!
Because you didn't follow my instructions!
Oh, well, Heil Hitler! And let me tell you something else. We flipped a coin, okay? You and me. You and me! Coin flip is sacred!
Walter was left speechless by Jesse's retorts and could only watch him drive away. On the other side, Skyler, knowing about Walter's recent odd behavior, suspected it was due to using contraband. She pretended to say she had written a novel character who used contraband and wanted to interview Marie about her experiences using contraband in college. This made the suspicious Marie think that her nephew, Walter Jr., was using contraband, so she asked her husband Hank to talk to Walter Jr. about it. Hank, utterly devoted to his wife Marie, listened to her every word and didn't dare neglect her requests. Soon, Hank took Walter Jr. to a chaotic place, with a clueless Walter Jr. not understanding what his uncle was up to. Hank randomly called a woman over and showed Walter Jr. her teeth, saying this was the consequence of using contraband. After the humiliation, Hank told the woman to scram and then started asking his grandnephew how he felt. However, Walter Jr.'s response surprised him.
Cool.
By evening, Walter was still at Jesse's house, engaged in a fierce internal debate. He listed many reasons not to kill Crazy 8, but if he lets him go, he will take revenge on his family. So it seems that Crazy 8 has to die. Seeing it was getting late, Walter hurriedly called his wife to explain that he was working overtime at the car wash. But what Walter didn't expect was that Skyler had already investigated and found out he had quit his job 2 weeks ago. Seeing his lie exposed, Walter could only comfort his wife by saying he would explain everything when he got home. But by then, Skyler was already angry and hung up the phone. Just then, Walter heard Crazy 8 asking for food again. Reluctantly, Walter started playing the caretaker again, even thoughtfully cutting off the crusts of the bread that Crazy 8 didn't like. However, just as Walter was bringing the plate down to the basement, he suddenly started coughing uncontrollably and then collapsed to the ground, the plate shattering in his hand. After who knows how long, Walter finally woke up. Crazy 8 was surprised to see someone faint from coughing for the first time. Walter was frank and admitted he had lung cancer. Then he cleaned up the broken plate and prepared to make Crazy 8 another sandwich. Seeing the beer in the fridge, Walter decided to have a good talk with Crazy 8. Through their conversation, Walter learned that Crazy 8 was a local, born and raised, and his father owned a local furniture store. Walter had even bought a baby crib from him for his son. It's a small world. He never imagined that years later they would meet in such a way. Crazy 8, a man with high emotional intelligence, guessed that Walter was manufacturing contraband because he had cancer and wanted to leave some money for his family before he died. Crazy 8 again urged Walter that this line of work wasn't for him and advised him to stop as soon as possible. He even offered Walter money for treatment if he let him go. Why take such a big risk to produce contraband? At that moment, Walter was swayed, at a time when he needed comfort and understanding the most. The clever Crazy 8 took advantage of his vulnerability. Moved by compassion, Walter decided to go upstairs to get the keys to release Crazy 8. He found the keys Jesse had hidden and then drank the beer in his hand. However, just as he was about to throw the bottle in the trash, he suddenly saw the broken plate shards he had thrown away. At that moment, a terrible thought crossed his mind. He hurriedly took out the broken pieces of the plate and tried to piece them together, but he couldn't make the plate whole again. At this moment, Walter was deeply saddened. He had already decided to release him, so why wouldn't Crazy 8 let go of him? Walter went to the basement and pretended to help Crazy 8 unlock the door. Sure enough, he saw that Crazy 8's hand was preparing to take out the pieces of the plate hidden in his pocket.
Are you gonna stick me with that broken piece of plate?
Reluctantly, Walter chose self-preservation. After a fierce struggle, the disadvantaged Crazy 8 eventually couldn't escape death. It was Walter's first time killing someone, and he was deeply disturbed, repeatedly muttering apologies. The next day, Jesse came back from outside. He saw that the RV had been tidied up and Crazy 8 was nowhere to be seen in the basement. He realized that Walter had dealt with Crazy 8. The ever-punctual Walter had also taken sick leave from school, with the vice principal covering his classes. Seeing the students' disappointed faces, it was clear they preferred Walter's lessons. The disappearance of Crazy 8 had also caught the attention of the DEA. Hank and his colleague found their RV in the suburbs and discovered Walter's high-purity contraband inside. Nearby, they also found the gas mask Walter had thrown away. On the other side, a relieved Walter returned home, and to dispel his wife's worries, he decided not to hide his illness anymore.
Skyler, there's something I have to tell you.